Welcome to the Strokecast. A Generation X stroke survivor explores rehab, recovery, the frontiers of neuroscience, and how to peel a banana with one hand.
Hello, I'm Bill Monroe, and welcome to episode 100 of the Strokecast. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. This is, well, obviously 100 is going to be a special episode regardless, but not only is this episode 100 of the podcast, today is also June 3rd, 2020. That means that this is my third Strokeaversary. So it has now been 3 years to the day since my life changed with that little tiny blood clot in my right middle cerebral artery, starving out my basal ganglia. So, this has been quite a year and quite a path. Obviously, the schedule for the show has been a little bit different over the last several months because, well, there's been a lot going on from doing things like starting a full-time job, acquiring a home, working with a support group and trying to find a space for our group to meet. And then, of course, all the COVID stuff. As we got into May and I realized, oh, wow, I am just about to hit my Strokeaversary at episode 100 at the same time. I should try and time that out and do something special. Well, of course, I ran out of time to do something special, but here we are. Instead, I want to spend some time today talking about my experience, understanding a number of the things that I've learned, talking about where I am today, some of the deeper meanings that I found, what my hospital experience was like now that I can look back on it 3 years down the road. And of course, how not only do I think about some of these things, but what lessons can you learn from my experience about processing these various experiences and these various seasons in my life? So that's what we're going to talk about today. So to begin with, where are we at with the show? I've had some fantastic experiences, and I have gotten to talk to some amazing people. And if I think about it, why did I start this show? Well, I started it because this is the show that I wanted on June 3rd, 2017, and it didn't exist at that point. I wanted the inspiration, the information, and the connection that I've tried to bring here. That morning, I joined a community, the community of stroke survivors, and I had no idea how much I was about to learn or how much I was about to share. And I say again and again that at this point, I knew way more about neurology and neuroplasticity than any marketing guy should ever know. And that's been because of this show, the fantastic guests that I've talked with. And, I thank everybody who has graced me with the time to be on the show. And I very much thank you for the time you take to listen and consume the show. With that said, where am I today in my recovery? I guess here's the overall look at where I'm at now, 3 years after a stroke. I am working full-time, yay, and working from home, which is even better. I bought a condo with my girlfriend at the beginning of the year. Overall, I'm getting around pretty well. Probably not as well as I think I'm getting around, but I'm walking faster with my cane. I still wear an AFO for longer walks when I go out and about. But around the house and for shorter distances, I don't actually need the cane. It's just that using the cane saves a heck of a lot of energy, keeps me a lot more stable, and helps me move faster. Getting around without the cane comes at about a 2x spoon penalty. But it's nice to know that if I have to, I can put it aside. In terms of upper extremities, well, my left arm is probably back at about 60%. I have pretty good motion, reasonably good strength. We're not 100%, and maybe we'll get there. And actually, I'm sure we will get there someday. We're just not at 100% yet. My left hand is down around probably about 20% of effectiveness. I don't have all the extension in my fingers that I need yet, and I still deal with the tone and spasticity that drives it into a fist from time to time, especially as we're all in that sort of lockdown era of non-essential medical procedures not being done, which has put off my latest Dysport or Botox injections to reduce that tone. But, I'm adapting. The neurofatigue hits me less often than it used to. I did learn something very interesting about neurofatigue at the beginning of the year in my case, though, and that's that really what the stroke has done is it has left me with no buffer. Back in January, I hurt my shoulder, my right shoulder, my unaffected shoulder, by doing something silly like sleeping, because I'm apparently at that point in my life where I injure myself sleeping. And that meant that I was down to probably about 3/4 of functional upper limbs. But the thing about that experience was that left my shoulder in extreme pain. And I could push through the pain. I could get by with the pain. It sucked, of course, but I could get by with it. But the big problem is that it took all of my energy. Just dealing with that pain, it just sucked the energy right out of me. So I could work for a half hour to an hour, and then I'd have to nap for an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours. I would just lose. I just had no buffer of that extra energy that I could draw from when something else, like the shoulder, went wrong. And I imagine that's something I'm going to have to deal with for many years to come. The stroke and the damage to the brain has left me without that sort of backup reserve that I can draw from. As long as things generally go well, I'm going to be fine. But when something does go wrong, there's just not that contingency resource available to me. And that's something I have to be aware of as I navigate life going forward. In terms of other key metrics, well, blood pressure, we're doing okay. We're at generally in the neighborhood of 130 over 80. Not fantastic, but not bad. Cholesterol and blood sugar, those numbers are all good. Yes, I probably still need to eat less and exercise more. And I still live with a PFO, a small hole in my heart that they found after the stroke, but likely didn't cause it. And they also found I have an enlarged aorta, which we're sort of keeping an eye on, but it seems to be holding steady. So we don't anticipate any further problems with that. I had a plan to get back into physical therapy this year so I could learn how to run again and start running, not for like any, regular exercise purposes, but more so that I can extract myself quickly from a situation should I find that need. But then, of course, the Rona happened and that shut down all of that. I remember when I was in the hospital thinking that, by the time I'm in my 50th year, which at this point would be next year, I'd like to sort of be able to go hiking around Mount St. Helens. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that. I may be able to do it. I may be in physically capable enough to do it. Whether I have the stamina and the general fitness, maybe we'll see how we get there. But of course, then in order to do that, I also have a lot more research and learning to do and finding options for doing that. But that is something I'm sort of keeping my eye on. Something else that has been, I suppose it shouldn't be a surprise, but it turned out to be a little bit of a surprise, is that the most amazing occupational therapy I've had over the last few months has come from IKEA. As we've acquired more furniture, I've had to go ahead and build more furniture and figure out how to do that with one fully functioning hand and one that is not nearly fully functioning. But I think that whole experience of assembling more bookcases and cabinets and whatnot, and as well as just moving and packing and throwing boxes, has definitely helped return some of the capabilities to that hand. So that's sort of some of the quick look at where we're at. Now, though, I want to go a little bit deeper. Let's talk about some of these other things that come up, some of these other things that I think about at night. When something like a stroke happens, it makes a lot of people question their mortality. Suddenly, death is something that, hey, you know what? This could be a real thing that could actually happen to me. In my experience, I don't think it inspired a particular fear of death, and not something soon. I mean, I'm still anticipating another 150 years or so before that becomes a thing. But the thing about stroke is, it's not that I even never thought it could happen to me. You think that, no, that would never happen to me. I never even got to that point. I never even thought about it at all. It wasn't a question of floating around my mind was, will you have a stroke sometime in the next couple of decades? I mean, it wasn't like I thought, nah, that won't happen to me. It was like, the question never even occurred to me. It never even made sense that was something that would be a part of my modern world. So I guess what's striking about this is just how fast things can change, how fast life can change. In the case of a stroke, I mean, obviously it happens in a flash. I think folks outside the stroke world are encountering some of that with how quickly the world shut down over the course of the COVID-19 shutdowns, and now we're with the things that are happening around. Even the protests happening in the streets right now at the end of May and the beginning of June here in 2020. And who knows what else is going to happen in 2020. But the speed at which our world can change, and that then we have to adapt. I mean, 3 years ago on June 2nd, I was spending that night, I was watching the Gunslingers story of William Hartnell's doctor on Doctor Who. Terrible story, by the way. Probably the worst one. In one of the very worst classic Doctor Who stories was the Gunslingers. I do not recommend it. Who knows? It may cause strokes. But I mean, I was watching that series of stories and just using my left hand for just forgettable everyday life things. And that was it. That was the last time that would happen. Because after I went to bed that next morning when I woke up, it didn't work anymore. And it's only barely now coming back. And it just happened in a moment, in a way that I never could have expected. And so that rapid change, that rapid way that life can turn is something I think I'm probably becoming more attuned to now. That any of these things can change in a moment, and we can adapt, but you're not going to get the build up. You may not get that ramp up to plan things. It just happens, and then you've got to adapt to a new way of living. And as we start thinking beyond that, and as I start looking more towards the future, the other thing that happens is, 3 years ago, I became a person with disabilities. Now, what happens is, as that starts to fade, in another 5 years, what does that mean? Obviously, I want to finish recovering and get all my functionality back, but in another 3 to 5 years, maybe I won't be eligible for my disability plates on my car anymore. Maybe it won't be obvious that I have a disability when folks meet me in regular life. And, obviously I know I'm always going to have the brain damage, but I'm starting to ponder the idea of what does that mean for my personal sense of identity and who I am. What does it mean to potentially go back to somebody who is maybe does have 4 fully functioning limbs or nearly fully functioning limbs? And I don't know. I mean, obviously that would be a great thing to have happen, but at the same time, it's a little scary too. So those are just some of those things that I have been thinking about from a big picture perspective. I've also been thinking more about that month in the hospital. The more I've listened to other survivors share their stories and their experiences. And actually, I just recently got a copy of all of my hospital records. So I'm starting to go through those, not because I need to check up on the hospital, but just because I am certain that month where my brain was recovering from the stroke and I was probably still swollen for much of that month, was, it's entirely possible a lot of my memories aren't as fully accurate as I might like. And so that's why I got those records. I want to go back through them and just figure out what was happening from a third-party perspective. And I think that's going to be very interesting as I read that. One thing I did learn is that the folks on the neuro ICU floor described me as pleasant. And you know what? I'll take that. But as I've been thinking about that month in the hospital, what's interesting is that in many respects, I enjoyed it. I mean, I was in no rush to go home or to leave the hospital. In part because I figured, well, as long as I'm there, I can focus on my recovery. And as long as I'm continuing to recover, I may as well stay there and get as much out of it as I can. See, the thing about hospital life was that it was simple. My whole job was just to do the work of my recovery, to try to sleep at night, to do the exercises with my therapists, to, I guess, rest and sit up and just process the experience the rest of the time. I mean, make no mistake. I mean, this was work, but it was simple. There were things that were more difficult. I mean, nighttime was rough, especially in those early days. One of the things we don't think about too often is that rolling over is sort of one of those major developmental milestone stages for a newborn. We celebrate the time when a newborn infant can now roll over as they start to grow up. And that's something a very new infant can't do. And suddenly I found myself back before that roll over by yourself developmental milestone. I had to go ahead and try and recover that. I mean, and it was hard at first. I mean, I had always been a side sleeper, and I always slept on my left side. And now, well, I couldn't sleep on my left side after the stroke because there was too much risk of shoulder pain or potentially dislocating that shoulder, since, as I've said before, the shoulder is the single worst designed joint in the human body. And without being able to engage those muscles due to the stroke, I was at, obviously a lot more risk for subluxation and actually experiencing some shoulder subluxation where the shoulder gradually pulls itself out of the socket. So I had to sleep on my side. I had to roll over onto my right side. And I had to do that while dragging the dead weight of the left side of my body because the arm and the leg couldn't help. And the left arm would actually sometimes get stuck behind my back. Those left side core muscles were basically offline as well. And at the same time I was doing that, I had this super annoying, for the first several days at least, this super annoying wireless cardiac monitor with all kinds of wires connected to me. That was also making it more difficult. And at night, I had these leg squeezy things that gradually pumped my calves at the foot of the bed, connected to these air pumps, which is designed to help prevent blood clots from forming in the calves due to lack of motion. And so I was trying to manage with turning over like that. And then once I do successfully turn over, then that has messed up my blankets. So I have to hope that my girlfriend, who, if she was staying over that night, was still awake and could fix my blankets, or that one of the aides would come by, or I would have to actually page someone from the desk to help with my blankets. And, that was one of those things that's just really striking. Here I was, 46 years old at night, laying in bed and having to ask somebody to come tuck me in because I moved. And that was life. And nighttime was rough for that. I mean, plus a hospital is you're supposed to get sleep, but it's a terrible place to sleep. Hospitals are loud. They're bright. There are people checking on you that, all for very good reasons, but none of that is conducive to good sleep. Actually, while I was in the hospital, we went through a series of different sleeping pills and ultimately ended up with me taking an Ambien every night just so I could get some sleep, so I could have the chance for my brain to do some of the recovery work overnight so that the next day I could get value out of my therapy. It's the only time I've ever really needed the Ambien, and they left me with a prescription when I checked out, 30-day supply in case I had trouble sleeping when I got home. And, here I am 3 years later, and I still have most of those pills left. So there were certainly challenges there, but, you do what you have to do and you work through it. And it was awesome to have, Cathy staying overnight in the room to just help out and to just be there. And that makes a huge difference, and I'm so appreciative of that. A lot of people have complained in pop culture about hospital food. My experience with the hospital food was that it was fine. I've talked before about my challenges with jelly packets and things like that, so I won't go into that here. But the food, it was not extraordinary, but it wasn't bad. Oh, and there were so many lentils. I've never eaten so many lentils in my entire life as I did that month. But the food was perfectly fine. I wasn't there for a gourmet 5-star dining experience. I was there to work on my recovery and get the nutrition I needed, and it absolutely did that. One of the things that I did find related to that, which was still interesting to me now, is that each day we would have to fill out the menu, the order form for our meals for the next day. So you choose what you want for your breakfast, your lunch, your dinner, and you leave that form outside your room, and they pick it up, and then they deliver it mostly correct the next day. Filling out that order form made me unreasonably angry. And maybe that was part of the emotional ability. Maybe that was part of some other changes that have happened. But I would just get angry just trying to fill out this form to order food. And it wasn't complicated. It wasn't one of the stupid or bureaucratic things I've had to deal with. It was just a thing. But for some reason, that became the focus of my anger when I was in there. Still, I don't quite get that. One of the highlights of one of the highlights of my stays was those near daily trips that Cathy would take me on down to Starbucks in the lobby of the hotel. Yeah. Great hospital, not great hotel, but take me down to the lobby Starbucks, and we would go get some coffee, and then she'd just wheel me out, and we'd just spend an hour and a half, 2 hours just sort of sitting outside in front of the hospital, looking at cars come by and drop people off. And it was just such a peaceful time. Those Starbucks experiences, even if we didn't talk very much, were just, sort of the perfect break in the day. And it was a fantastic time to just do that and just be quiet and relax and soak up some of the fresh air of the vehicle drop-off area. And of course, the nurses and aides were almost all great. Of course, Jizuki and Celeste on 5 were amazing. The nurses that I had when I was on the 6th floor of Swedish were also fantastic. And of course, Emily, Olivia, Megan, and Michael and their colleagues in physical and occupational therapy were, the best you could absolutely get. And I am grateful to still be in touch with several of them today. I'll always love hearing from, the latest adventures of Emily and Olivia and the things that they are up to, and Megan and what she's doing. And it's just fantastic. And of course, I get fantastic care from Dr. Kim Middleton, who you heard from just a few weeks ago, talking about stroke and COVID-19 in episode 98. Her colleague, Dr. Steen, as well as the other physiatrist there. So, I have no complaints about the care I got from that staff. But the thing is, the trauma of stroke, the way it resets a life, isn't just about the instance of the stroke itself, or about the disabilities that it leaves a person with. It's also about the hospital time and the treatment and the way you get pulled away from your life for good and for ill. Even when your care is good, all of that is part of the trauma of that whole experience. The trauma from stroke didn't end that afternoon or that evening when that clot cleared from the artery in my brain and I had blood flow again past the dead tissue. It was that whole experience, that whole time. And that leaves a mark. And I only partially understand the mark that it's left on me at this point, 3 years later. And I think I'm going to still learn things about that experience and what it's done to me and what it's done for me in the years ahead. So as I start thinking about these different periods, that month in the hospital, how do I go ahead and organize this stuff in my brain? Because I like to organize things in my brain. I like to break things down into categories to understand how various events relate to one another. And one of the structures that I find really helpful is something I heard first on the Cliff Ravenscraft show, that podcast. And Cliff has been a podcaster for years. And one of the things he talks about is seasons in life. And I don't think it's his original idea, but the idea of thinking about things in seasons, not just in the major. And by seasons, we don't just mean like the spring of your life, the summer of your life, the autumn of your years, but getting more granular, where a season can be several weeks to several months of just a different period of focus. And it's sort of different from the big eras in life, because I also think about life in terms of larger eras and, where these different points of inflection in life are, where I think about things where if I don't know the year something happened, I think about it in relation to other events. There are pretty much 8 of those major events in my life that I use to mark things, things with reference to the Challenger explosion in 1986, graduating from college in 93, the release of Windows 95 in 95, moving to Seattle in 98. Of course, most everything exists pre 9/11 or post 9/11. And then, of course, stroke in 3 years ago marked another major split. And then, starting a new job in August of last year marked another major inflection point. And then, I want to say eventually COVID-19 is going to be a major inflection point in life, but I think it's a little too soon right now to understand just how those shutdowns are going to impact everything, especially as 2020 continues to turn into its own kind of dumpster fire. But when we think about seasons themselves are more granular. And some of those seasons are going to be really intense and they reflect different priorities. I know there were a couple of really hectic seasons within semesters in college. I think of the time between losing my job and having my stroke as another season. My inpatient time at that hospital, that is one season of life. My period of at-home rehab is another season of life. And then starting a job became yet another season. And then this past November through April has been another incredibly busy season of life with, work really ramping up, house shopping, trying to find a new home for our support group, and then dealing with the COVID-19 shutdowns and the impacts on everything around me. And I think that since April, I've sort of moved into a little bit calmer season where things are a little bit more stable and I could be a little bit more reflective now. A lot of the core infrastructure of life is now in place, in a new place. And I'm not sure how long this season is going to last. If it's going to be a few weeks, a few months before whatever the next major season I need to switch over to is. But you see, as a season ends and becomes a new season, priorities can shift. Some seasons may be more focused on work. Some seasons of life are more focused on family or health or on a hobby or on, shutting down and withdrawing. And it's helpful to think about these things because when you're in the middle of a busy season or you're wondering, are your priorities in the right place for these next few weeks, it's helpful to think of a season as something that will end. So you can look forward and realize, maybe I don't know when this season is going to end, or maybe I can look at the different things I have going on and plan on this season ending in a month or 2 months. And if I can see an end to a busy or an unpleasant season, then it becomes a lot easier to work on it and to get through it and to do what needs to be done in order to make it happen. Because it's hard to do something forever. Heck of a lot easier to do it for a day, or to do it for a week, or to do it for a month. And that is part of the power of seasons. It helps us refocus and rethink that. And it's certainly been a helpful mechanism for me, and I hope it can be helpful for you as well. Well, and that brings me to our hack of the week. As we've gone through more and more of the COVID-19 shutdowns and social distancing and being careful about what you touch, I've really come to realize that walking with a cane is now a huge advantage because I actually use my cane, the handle on my cane, the front of the handle on my cane, to press elevator buttons and door buttons. And I can use the handle to hook door handles as appropriate or to push things out of the way because the cane itself now helps me maintain that extra distance. It helps me protect my hands from other things that might potentially not be as clean as we would like. So as you're going about your day, going about your week, and going about, your time out in the world, be sure to, and if you carry a cane, be sure to use it. Use it to hit those elevator buttons. Use it to push that door. Use it in those ways that can help keep your hands away from those surfaces, help keep them cleaner, and help keep you and your loved ones healthy for as long as possible. So that's it for episode 100 of the Strokecast and for my third Strokeaversary episode. I still have to go ahead and figure out how I want to celebrate, commemorate, or otherwise recognize this day later in the day today. But where do we go from here? Well, think about the season that you are in now. And how can understanding that season help you get through it and help you maximize that benefit for yourself and for your family? I'd also ask you to go ahead and follow me on Instagram. You can follow me on Instagram, where I am Bills_Strokecast on Instagram. And you can just either search for that on Instagram or just go to strokecast.com/Instagram and it'll take you right there. Please share this episode with 3 people that you know, survivors, caregivers, or medical professionals, by giving them the website strokecast.com/3years. And of course, as always, don't get best. Get better. Thanks a lot. I'm Bill Monroe. I'll talk to you soon, and for another at least 100 episodes. Have a great day.
The Strokecast, Bill Monroe, and Bill's guests provide general information and entertainment, not medical advice. Please do not make any changes to your treatment plan or the execution of your treatment plan without first consulting your personal doctor or medical team. The Strokecast is a proud production of the Currently Speaking Podcast Network.